And we are live. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our viewers around the world. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our sixth Friday Fireside chat. So, uh, this time this is going to be a little different. What we're going to do is we are joined by AppSecEngineer CEO Abhay Bhargav. Hi, Abhay.
Hi.
So,
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
so Yeah. So this time, this one's going to be a bit of a different sort of a live session where we are going to be presenting a couple of labs from our one of our best-selling courses at AppSec Engineer, both last year and this year. This is a quite a new course which we launched just last year, the Attacking the Application Supply Chain course. So this year it's been one of our best-selling courses, and we actually do have a couple of seats left. So if this is something that makes sense for you, you should definitely grab those last few seats before they run out. So we are going to run through a few of those labs just to show you what we'll be learning, how those labs are going to go, and learn a few things about supply chain security today. So that's going to be today's agenda. So remember that we do have 4 trainings happening at blackhat this year through V45, and we do have a booth at Startup City. So find the AppSec Engineer booth at Startup City if you are going to be coming to Black Hat USA 2023 at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, August 9th to 10th, right? Okay,
Absolutely.
so Abhay, what will we be learning today?
So, just to give you a little bit of a background as to why this training actually came about, right? So, last year was the first time this training debuted. It was written for Black Hat, and it debuted at Black Hat last year. It was a really well received training. We had a lot of people who loved it. In fact, a lot of people from places like Google and GitHub attended the training, and they enjoyed it quite a lot simply because they were like, these are things that we deal with on a daily basis. So, the reason why this training actually happened was because supply chain security has become, as all of you know, a very, very important talking point. It started to feature in every single government legislation, government regulation, not only in the US but also outside of the US, even in Europe and different parts of Asia. You're starting to see supply chain security mentioned in different parts of the world. And supply chain security has become one of those points that people are really looking to address in a comprehensive way. So, one of the thoughts that we had was initially, we are mostly a defensive security training. We mostly have defensive security training, but one of the things that I thought about last year was why not have something that is out and out offensive, which is somebody looking to attack supply chains. How would they do it? Because a lot of times you want somebody to validate controls, validate security. So supply chain security, most people don't even understand. In terms of forget the defense, but the attack, nobody almost understands. A lot of people don't really get supply chain security and how to attack it and why it works the way it works. And I think if you want to understand how things work, you need to understand how things break. So that is why we went with an attacking first perspective of this class. So in this class, we it's basically a journey into different layers of supply chain. So it starts off from the code and the dependencies that developers use. They write these. I mean, obviously, your developers are using code. I mean, they are developing code. They're using these dependencies and libraries to develop their code. That might bring in some supply chain risks. Then, of course, you might be using infrastructure as code like Terraform and stuff like that to deploy modules on the cloud. That brings it in its own supply chain risk. You might be deploying this as part of an automated CI/CD process. That brings in its own supply chain risk. Once you deploy it to a certain container registry, containerized environment, that brings in its own supply chain risk. And then once you deploy it finally to a production environment or some kind of cloud native environment, that brings it its own security risk. So
Right.
the class essentially is a bunch of stories about how supply chain risk can happen at all layers of the application development lifecycle. And of course, as always, we have it all in lab style. So it's all going to be a whole bunch of labs that people are going to be working on to figure out how they can defeat different types of supply chain, or they can perform different types of supply chain exploits, attacks, and so on. So that's basically what this is, what the class is going to be all about.
Right. That sounds really cool. So we will be
Yeah,
seeing, I'm sure, I hope we'll be seeing some live demos of the
yeah,
labs in this session, right?
yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. Yeah.
So I think we can get started, right?
Yes, I think so. Let's actually let me
Awesome.
just start presenting my screen. So this year we've just we're loading the labs for the latest course, and we're actually testing it out. So you'll see some of the stuff that is behind the scenes right now. So let's go through some of the labs that we're planning for this year, which is actually a lot of fun. And as you can see, the labs kind of take you from the basics right here, or from the package managers to the CI/CD to containers to Kubernetes to cloud to application stuff. So you kind of have the whole flow of things here. Now, one of the labs that has always kind of produced this jaw-dropping reaction is this lab. It's a very simple lab, but it actually gotten people extremely worried about uh, Terraform and using Terraform. And that is this lab on using malicious Terraform modules. Now, Terraform is one of the most popular tools that all of us use for spinning up content on the cloud, right? If you want to obviously spin up resources on the cloud, manage resources on the cloud, do infrastructure as code on the cloud, Terraform is pretty much your number one choice. Not only on the cloud, but even in any other type of cloud native solution, Terraform is something that people use. They use it not only for the big three clouds like AWS, Azure, GCP, they also use it for things like GitHub, they use it for Okta, they use it for pretty much any and everything in terms of resource spin-ups that they want to do. So, or to manage infrastructure as code on the cloud. So, in this lab, essentially, this talks about a slightly dark side of Terraform, which is basically using Terraform modules. Now, let me walk through this lab and explain this as I go along. And I'm also going to, of course, be using this lab in the class as well. So it's a lot of fun. It's a very simple lab, but it actually has a lot of layers in in depth, right? So, and as always, we'll be using AppSecEngineer labs. So you'll see that the labs are going to be really smooth, really easy to work with. So all the students at Black Hat are going to get 2 months of access to AppSecEngineer, all of these labs, and they'll be able to, even after they're done with the class, they'll be able to use these labs. So that's one of the fun parts of being a student at Black Hat at one of our courses, because you're not only going to get access to the labs at the time, which is what you will see with most of the training providers, but with us you'll also get access to a long-term access for about a couple of months afterwards. So if you look at the Terraform modules attack, it's going to be a lot of fun. So just to show you how that works. Now, Terraform essentially has different types of things, right? Different types of abstractions to think about. So if you look at Terraform, in fact, if you look at Terraform registry, you will see what I'm talking about. So this is the Terraform registry, right? This is the app store for Terraform, so to speak. Now, the way it works is that you have something called providers, you have modules, and you have policy libraries, etc., etc. You have all of this stuff. Now, Terraform providers are basically what most of us use by default, right? Even without and realizing it, we're all using Terraform providers, right? So Terraform providers basically are APIs or modules that allow you to talk to cloud APIs to spin up resources on the cloud. That's basically what Terraform providers are doing. So, for instance, you have an Azure provider or an AWS provider. What these providers help you do is that using the providers, in this case AWS's API resources, you're able to spin up resources on AWS cloud. So you can write Terraform code, and that Terraform code is in turn translated to AWS APIs, and those APIs are used to deploy resources, delete resources, manage resources on AWS. These are typically those providers, right? You have different classes of providers. You have different levels of assurance of those providers. You have official partner, etc. All of these different levels. But you also have something called modules, and this is where it gets a lot of fun, right? Because modules are like libraries to sit on top of Terraform. So let's say spinning up Kubernetes on AWS. It's a lot of work. You have to write a lot of Terraform code to get that done. Now, instead of writing all that code yourself all the time, you can use a module, which is a pre-built set of Terraform declarative instructions to help you spin up something or do something, right? Now, modules are like a library for Terraform. So I could use a module and spin up something on Terraform, or use that to just reference it and say that use this module and fill up these variables, and you're off to the races. Right? That's basically what Terraform modules are. So they're like libraries, and most people don't think of it that way. They think that modules are essentially trusted, whereas modules are written by anyone. Anyone can write a module and publish those modules. In fact, you don't even have to use Terraform registry for those modules. You can literally just git reference a module and you're done. You don't need to do anything else. So it's a lot of there is a lot of trust placed on a module, and people don't realize that that trust is probably unfounded, right? So that is potentially a very dangerous notion to think that modules are super secure when they're absolutely not. A lot of the modules are just written by random people all over the internet, and there is no real assurance to say that these modules are great or these modules have been checked for security issues and all that. They're just written by random people, right? It's not necessarily some. So you can literally write a module to do certain things, which is not necessarily something that's or from a company that you trust, or they've done a lot of audit on it or security assurance on it. There's none of that stuff. Now let's look at an example of a module, right? So in this case, we have some code that we've written, and we're using a module, right? And the way you can use a module from the file system, you can use it from a Git repository, you can use it from the Terraform registry, you can use it from whatever you want. In this case, we're just using a module. Now, this module is helping up spin up a secret on AWS. This is what the module is doing. So imagine that spinning up a secret is a complicated task on AWS. So this module says that, hey, just pass parameter name and I'll take care of handling that secret and I'll take care of all that heavy lifting for you. You don't need to do anything. So this is what the module is doing. You're just passing in a parameter name and it's giving you a secret and it's storing that secret, encrypting that secret, doing all that stuff on AWS. So this is what that module is doing. Okay, so you're just passing in a single variable and the module is doing most of the heavy lifting. Now, the module really, when you look at the module, you'll see that the module has a dark side to it, right? This is the module that somebody has come up with. So some developer on the internet has written this module, and it's a lot of people have shared it and said it's an awesome module. Please use this. Blah 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 blah. So this is what the module is doing. It is definitely doing what it's intended to do, which is basically generate a secret and encrypt it and store it in AWS. But the module is also doing something which is terribly wrong, which is sending that secret over to the attacker controlled IP address or attacker controlled URL somewhere, right? So in this case, it's sending it over to an attacker. It's sending over the actual secret value to that attacker controlled listener out on the internet. So this is what a malicious Terraform module is. So if you're not careful, if you don't check for this sort of security issues, you might actually have a scenario where you are using something, you're placing this implicit level of trust on that particular um, piece of code or that module, and that module is doing something completely nefarious without you understanding that it does that, right? So let's actually go ahead and run this lab. It's a lot of fun. So, and in this case, we're actually going to be using AppSec Engineers, the sandbox cloud environment. We're actually going to spin up a new AWS environment and do all of that stuff to get this working, right? So we're going to spin up a new AWS environment, and we're also going to spin up a listener. Since we are going to behave as both the victim and the attacker in this case, we're also going to spin up a listener to actually get our attack working, right? So let's actually run our code, which is using that malicious module. Okay, so this is our code. We don't know, we are none the wiser on what the module is doing. We think that it's generating a secret and storing it in AWS, but it's doing a whole bunch of other more dangerous things, right? So now we're going to run our code, which is what we are anyway going to do, and we should see that it's done very quickly. It creates that secret, and we are happy that it's created that secret when we're done. So it's done. So we feel that yeah, it's all done. It's awesome, great, blah 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 blah. Now you will see that without our knowledge, this module has sent over that secret to the attacker controlled listener here, right? And that's really the danger of using Terraform modules. And Terraform is incredibly powerful. In this case, you're just sending a secret over to an attacker control listener, but you can actually have remote execution, you have local execution, you can a module can potentially take over the local machine, it can start firing ransomware, it can do a lot of things if you're not careful, right? So this is really, really bad. It can be really, really bad. So this is one of those things that you can see. So you see the module, what it's doing is that it's doing most of the legitimate stuff here, which is legit. It's nothing wrong with this. But what is really happening at this point is that the module is sending over the secret to another location. In this case, it happens to be our own internal IP address, but in a real world scenario, this could be some other IP address, some other domain, and it would actually work because the Terraform module is just by default doing this. And people don't know that it's doing this, and as a result, you have this particular problem. Now, one of the ways to fix this, and there are a bunch of ways to fix this, we do briefly allude to fixes in the class as well, but it's not really so much about the fixes. The class, in this case, is not so much about the fixes, it's more about the attacks. So that is one thing you need to know about this particular class, right? It's really more about the exploits, the attacks, the attack possibilities. So that is really something that you need to think about. So now a lot of people will be like, yeah, this is something that you need to scan for security issues. You need to scan these for security issues. So let's actually use a very popular tool to scan for security issues. This is a static analysis tool for infrastructure as code called Chekhov. And Chekhov should be able to identify this. So it says that, yeah, you're sending some information over an HTTP request. So it actually catches it, which is pretty good. However, I can easily evade that check by doing this, right? By essentially base 64ing the payload, I should bypass Chekhov's checks, so to speak. So it will say that, yeah, I passed, it's all good, we're all good, right? So that is something that can have a pretty huge issue as far as your reliance on static analysis providers are concerned. So you need to be a little careful to understand, probably have some custom rules and things like that, but it's not always that straightforward, right? So that is something that you have to think about. It's not like super easy to always catch these things. Sometimes you'll catch them, sometimes you'll miss them. And there are a bunch of tools that can do this for you, but sometimes, again, it's not always that straightforward that you should be able to immediately catch it and get it to work and so on. So this is one of those labs that has always gotten this shocked reaction from people because people don't realize um, the kind of impact that this has. And people automatically assume that Terraform is secure or Terraform is valid or Terraform is validated, and people don't really do things like this with Terraform. People don't get the extent of the problem that is there. This is not only Terraform, any other infrastructure as code allows you to reuse modules, reuse libraries, and things like that. And that can have a pretty huge downstream impact as far as security is concerned. So this is one of those labs that we have in the class that is quite powerful, quite interesting as well. So this is what we have, Anish. What do you think?
Okay, so wow, this is a really interesting, this is a really interesting demo. So, what other kind of supply chain attacks really, would you see in a real world sort of scenario? What sort of
Yeah, I
supply
mean
chain
that's a
attacks would you?
yeah, it's a good question actually. See, if you look at supply chain attacks, right? So a lot of it has to do with CI tools, right? So CI, especially CI environment, build environments, containers. So in fact, you will see that one of the labs that we have is so if you look at it really, I would say that the sections that are probably some of the meatiest sections in the class are these two sections around the CI/CD attacks and the container attacks. These
Right,
attacks
right.
can have massive downstream effects because uh, again, this is based on the potential for implicit trust, right? So a lot of people assume that the CI/CD systems are just building things and there's nothing much you can do. But CI/CD systems have a lot of power over your actual software, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of power, they exercise a lot of power. If you're not careful, the CI/CD system that you're using or the build system that you're using can introduce vulnerabilities into your code, introduce backdoors into your code. All kinds of stuff can happen. So that is one of those things that I feel can be a pretty big thing. In fact, if you look at the CI/CD section of the class, you will see that it has a huge number of labs. You'll see that this
Right.
probably
Yeah.
has the most number of labs in the class, simply because there are so many things that can go wrong. In fact, OWASP has a very interesting project called the CI/CD Security Top 10, which talks about different CI/CD security risks. And we cover most of those risks in this class, right? So we talk about different
Oh,
types of
nice.
risks and how they work and what are the different issues that you'll see. In fact, there's one attack where we are going to attack a GitHub Actions, GitHub Actions example where we're going to inject stuff into GitHub Actions and then start to compromise the code, compromise the secrets, doing all kinds of stuff. So it's really powerful. That particular lab is, it takes a good 30 to 40 minutes, but that's one of those labs that leaves you incredibly satisfied as somebody who is in the pen testing or the exploit side. But it's incredibly scary for somebody who's a defender because it can have
Yeah.
a pretty huge downstream impact. So CI/CD is one of those areas. Containers is again one of those areas. We are covering at least two, three different types of container labs. And
Mm-hmm.
in this one, for instance, this is one of those labs that is one of my personal favorites, where we compromise a cloud environment and we steal credentials of that cloud environment. And instead of them using a genuine container, we kind of taint their container image and push a tainted container image into their container registry. And once that happens, every container they pull from that container registry is now tainted. It's running our malicious code. So it's like essentially poisoning the water supply, right? So it's basically
Yeah.
poisoning the
Yeah.
water supply, and everything that from there on reaches people or gets distributed is now tainted. So supply chain has those possibilities that a typical application does not. A typical application affects you or maybe your group or
Right.
your bunch of users, at least if it's a privately built application. But a supply chain attack has massive impact in terms of it depends again, of course. Sometimes it might be localized to you, sometimes it might be the
Yeah.
entire world, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes,
because
let's
some
say
of the
somebody,
biggest attacks have been supply chain attacks in recent years, right?
yeah. That's an ROI thing, right? Because if you
Right.
think about it, an attacker, if you look at what the attackers want to do, especially criminal gangs and financially motivated attackers, what they really want to do is they want return on investment. So they don't go after one application or one environment or one company. They want to
Mm-hmm.
go after ecosystems. And when they go after ecosystems, it becomes very easy for them to get much more value for money, right? So
Yeah. Fair enough.
that is really the benefit of attacking ecosystems. So if you attack ecosystems, it tends to be much more financially viable, tends to be much more useful, tends to have other downstream impacts that are really powerful stuff, right? So
Right.
that is one of those things that can have a pretty huge impact as far as um, supply chain attacks are concerned. So we are really looking to cover the whole gamut of this, and the
Mm-hmm.
way we are thinking about this is we're doing this very creatively. We're trying to take every story has a deep, like a very intricate attack sequence, and that's the fun part of this
Yeah.
training. It has an intricate, so you don't always start with, hey, I've got access to this. No, you don't. You start with, first of all, achieving that access, compromising the initial asset, then using that to do other
Yeah.
things, and using that to do other things, and using that to do other things, and then finally achieve your supply chain attack. So it kind of gives you this complete picture of how things actually
Mm-hmm.
happen in the real world. So we don't use these example apps. We actually don't. We kind of
Yeah, it's like a real world sort of,
Yeah, it's
workflow.
extremely real world. It's one of those things that has endeared a lot of people to this class, which is that, hey, you know what, this is super real world. This is super
Yeah.
specific how it works. So yeah,
So with this, you kind of get like the entire from the start to finish sort of experience of an attacker's approach, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. What they're looking for, how they're doing it,
Nice.
why they're doing what they're doing, what are they interested in doing. So you really get the attacker persona, the attacker motivation, the attack vector, the attack technique,
Hmm.
all of that stuff kind of on dial, and you get a very detailed perspective of this. So that's one of the benefits.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
this is, I think, one of the exciting courses that AppSec Engineer has launched in the last few years. So
Oh yeah.
I mean, I can't wait to be there for the actual, training at blackhat in in the next few days. So that's going to be really exciting.
Oh yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's an incredible amount of fun.
So remember, guys, we do have just a few seats remaining for that course on at Black Hat USA right now. So if you are interested in something like this, then you should definitely grab those seats before they run out, and definitely come say hi to us at our booth at Startup City. So this has been a lot of fun, Abhay. Thank you so much for this.
No, thanks so much for having me and discussing this. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can't wait for more such live events, live demos from you and from other people on the team. So this was great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. See ya. See you,
Bye
folks. Bye
bye.
bye.